There's a moment almost every new parent knows. It's somewhere around 2 in the morning.
The baby is fed, the diaper is clean.
The room is the right temperature, and still, the crying doesn't stop.
You've tried everything you can think of, and nothing is working. And somewhere in the back of your exhausted mind, a quiet question surfaces. Am I doing something wrong? Most parents in the Western world would answer that question by reaching for their phone.
They'd search, "Why won't my baby stop crying?" and end up down a rabbit hole of conflicting advice, sleep training debates, and forum threads that leave them more confused than before. And that's not their fault.
Western parenting culture tends to treat baby crying as a problem to be solved, something to eliminate as quickly and efficiently as possible. But in Japan, that question, "Am I doing something wrong?" rarely comes up in the same way.
Not because Japanese babies cry less, but because Japanese parents relate to crying differently. They've built something into their daily routine, almost invisibly, that changes how babies experience the world before the crying even begins. And when you understand what that is, it quietly shifts how you see everything.
Let's start with something called amai. It's a Japanese word that doesn't translate neatly into English, which is part of why it gets overlooked in Western parenting conversations.
Roughly, it means a kind of sweet, comfortable dependence, the feeling a child has when they know without any doubt that they are safe in someone's care, not just physically safe. Emotionally safe. The kind of safety where a baby doesn't need to cry to get attention because they've never learned to doubt that attention is coming.
Psychologists in the West have a parallel concept. They call it secure attachment. But Ama goes a step further.
It's not just an outcome. In Japanese culture, it's something parents actively build into the texture of everyday life from the very first weeks. Now, here's where the routine comes in. Japanese parenting, particularly in traditional and semi-traditional households, tends to follow what researchers have described as a high-contact, low-stimulation model.
And those two things together are more powerful than they sound. High contact means that babies spend a significant amount of time physically close to their caregiver.
In Japan, this often looks like anbuhimo, a traditional style of baby wearing where the baby is carried on the parent's back. This isn't just a cultural aesthetic. It has a direct, measurable effect on a baby's nervous system. Studies have shown that carried babies cry significantly less than babies who spend the majority of their time in a crib or bouncer. One widely referenced study found that increasing caring by just a few hours per day reduced infant crying by nearly 50%. The baby isn't being spoiled.
Their nervous system is simply being regulated by proximity to another regulated nervous system. That's the biology underneath the tradition.
A newborn's brain is not yet capable of self-regulating. It borrows calm from the people around it, literally through co-regulation. When a baby is close to a calm caregiver, their heart rate steadies, their cortisol levels drop, their breathing slows. They don't cry because their body isn't in distress. The Japanese practice of frequent carrying isn't sentimental, it's neurological. But here's the second part. And this is where it gets interesting. Low stimulation. This is the part that surprises most Western parents when they first encounter it. Japanese parenting environments, especially in early infancy, tend to be noticeably quieter and visually simpler than those in the United States, the UK, or Australia. Fewer flashing toys, fewer rotating mobiles, fewer background sounds competing for the baby's attention. This runs almost entirely counter to the Western instinct to enrich a baby's environment, to give them things to look at, sounds to respond to, colors to process. And the reason Japanese culture intuitively moved in the opposite direction has to do with something called the stress response threshold. A young baby's brain is not ready for high-input environments. Their sensory processing systems are still being built. When you expose a very young infant to too much stimulation, too many sounds, too much visual complexity, too much unpredictable movement, you don't accelerate their development. You overwhelm their system. The baby's stress response activates. Cortisol rises, and crying is the only output their body has for that state. Japanese households, almost by cultural default, tend to create environments that stay below that threshold. Soft voices,
Gentle transitions between activities, meals, baths, and sleep that happen in a consistent, predictable rhythm. And that consistency is arguably the most important piece of all. Babies don't experience time the way adults do. They can't reason about what comes next. What they have instead is pattern recognition, one of the earliest and most powerful tools the developing brain builds. When the same thing happens in the same order, at roughly the same time day after day, the baby's nervous system begins to anticipate rather than react. And anticipation, in a neurological sense, is the opposite of distress. A bath that happens every evening at the same time, in the same gentle way, with the same soft sounds, and the same familiar smell of the water, that becomes a signal. Not just a signal that it's bath time, a signal that the world is predictable, that safety is consistent, that there is no need to escalate. In contrast, many Western parenting approaches, and this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation about cultural defaults, tend to prioritize flexibility. Schedules that adapt to the parent's life, environments designed to stimulate and engage. Quick responses to crying that sometimes unintentionally reinforce the crying itself, because the baby learns that distress is the most reliable way to summon connection. Neither approach is wrong. But the outcomes are different. And when Western researchers have studied Japanese infant behavior, they've consistently noted lower rates of prolonged crying, calmer transitions between sleep and waking, and what one developmental psychologist described as a baseline contentment that appears to be the result of environmental design rather than temperament. Your baby's temperament matters. Some babies are simply more sensitive than others. That's real, and no parenting routine eliminates individual difference. But what the Japanese model shows us is that a significant portion of infant distress is environmental and therefore changeable. So what does this actually look like in practice? Not as a philosophical concept, but as something a parent can try this week. The first thing is deceptively simple: reduce before you enrich. If your baby is crying frequently and you haven't been able to identify a physical cause, look at their environment before adding something new to it. Turn off the background television. Dim the lights in the evening. Remove one or two of the toys in rotation. Create more silence. You may be surprised by what happens. The second thing is to build one predictable sequence somewhere in your day and protect it. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Bath, gentle massage, feeding, sleep, and that order at roughly the same time every evening. The consistency is more important than the content. Give it 2 weeks before you evaluate whether it's working. Babies don't update quickly, but they do update. The third thing, and this one is harder to implement in modern Western life, but worth thinking about, is contact before crying. The Japanese model works in part because babies are carried before they reach a state of distress. Contact is the default, not the response. If your life allows for more baby wearing earlier in the day, before the fussy window tends to arrive, that proactive regulation is more effective than reactive soothing. You're keeping the nervous system below threshold rather than trying to bring it back down after it's already escalated. And the fourth thing is something Japanese parents do that's less about routine and more about mindset. It's called mite-iru, watching. Before intervening, Japanese caregivers tend to observe, not in a detached way, but in a curious, patient way. What is this baby actually communicating? Is this the cry of hunger, or the cry of overstimulation, or the cry that happens right before sleep that doesn't actually need a response? Just presence.
Learning to read your baby's crying as information rather than alarm shifts something in the parent's nervous system too. Less panic, more curiosity. And that calm response, more than almost anything else, is what the baby's brain is picking up on.
There's a concept in developmental psychology called the still face experiment. You may have heard of it. When a caregiver's face goes blank and unresponsive, even for just 2 minutes, a baby will first try to re-engage, then begin to show visible signs of stress, then sometimes collapse into distress entirely.
The experiment is designed to show how sensitive babies are to their caregiver's emotional state. But what it also shows, if you watch the reunion phase of the experiment, is how quickly a baby recovers when the caregiver returns to warm, regulated presence. The repair is almost immediate, because what babies need most isn't a perfect environment.
It's a regulated, available human being. Japanese parenting at its best produces that kind of caregiver. Not through discipline or self-sacrifice, but through a cultural understanding that a calm baby begins with a calm environment, and a calm environment begins with a calm parent. The routine isn't for the baby alone. It's for both of you. Here's what's worth sitting with as this video ends. Crying is not failure. It's communication. And the goal of a parenting routine isn't to silence a baby. It's to build a world in which the baby has fewer reasons to call out because their needs are being met quietly, consistently, and in advance of distress. That's what the Japanese routine is really doing.
It's not a trick. It's not a method with a name you need to memorize.
It's a way of paying attention to rhythm, to environment, to the nervous system of a person who can't yet use words. And when you start paying attention that way, something shifts.
The crying doesn't just decrease, the relationship deepens.
Because you're no longer reacting to your baby, you're understanding them. And that, more than any specific technique, is what every baby is really asking for.